Hello and thank you for joining me. I'm Elizabeth Burden, your host for AZ Illustrated Arts. Playwright Bertolt Brecht once said, "Art is not a mirror held up to reality, but a hammer with which to shape it." Tonight we'll see how some artists in southern Arizona are using their talents to present unique perspectives and broaden the debate on some controversial topics. Why are these dancers letting wildlife be their choreographers? Find out about a new film project with a message called Rosemont Ours. I'll talk with a roundtable of guests about how and why artists address contemporary issues. We'll meet Favianna Rodriguez, who founded a coalition of artists to bring about political change through the connections made by art. And meet Stephen Derks, a painter and sculptor who believes that art is important to both redemption and healing. But first, today's top stories.
Pima Community College is holding a board meeting tomorrow to select a finalist in its search for a new chancellor. Last week, the college named Lee Lambert its leading candidate. Lambert is currently head of Shoreline Community College in Washington and is one of 4 candidates the college brought to Tucson for community forums during its search for a new leader. 6 people associated with Pima Community College traveled to Lambert's college this week in what Pima calls a fact-finding mission. The meeting to select a finalist for PCC Chancellor starts at 11 a.m. tomorrow. Davis-Monthan Air Force Base will be affected by the Defense Department's civilian furloughs. The base's commander, Colonel Kevin Blanchard, says 1,300 workers at the base will be furloughed 1 day a week from July to September.
These 1,300 civilians are a critical part of our mission, and it's going to be tough to get by with all of them having to take 11 days unpaid. But we're most concerned about them and their families. Obviously, this is a 20% pay cut for 11 weeks that's going to hit all of them financially, especially some of our lower wage grade workers, where maybe they're the only breadwinner in the house.
Blanchard says civilians contribute to every aspect of Davis-Monthan's work, and during the furloughs, the base will prioritize tasks so the most important functions are not affected. The Arizona legislature was debating a number of budget bills today, including proposals to expand the state's Medicaid program, which provides health insurance to poorer residents. The Medicaid expansion amendment was one of many proposed changes to a draft of the state budget unveiled this week. A top Republican and a top Democrat say they anticipate the expansion will pass, but debate on the contentious issue is expected to continue into the evening. And that's a look at today's news.
If it is approved, the proposed Rosemont Mine project will bring copper mining to the Santa Rita Mountains southeast of Tucson. Supporters argue that the Rosemont Mine will provide economic benefits to the region, including nearly 3,000 jobs, and inject close to $19 billion to the local economy. Supporters say that it would also help to reduce U.S. dependence on foreign mineral sources. Opponents disagree. In this next story, we see how one group is using dance to celebrate the plants and animals in the currently undeveloped area.
This is an unexpected landscape located about 30 minutes outside of Tucson, Arizona. The quiet pools and springs shaded with cottonwood, willow, and high cliffs support a diverse range of life. The area is a designated natural preserve, and it is part of a watershed system fed by the Canelo Hills and the Santa Rita Mountains.
We are at the Cienega Creek, and it's a very special riparian area in southern Arizona.
Kimmy Eisel is co-director of New Articulation's Dance Theater. The group is currently working on a dance film honoring the plant and animal species of the Santa Rita Mountains and Cienega Creek in southern Arizona.
The Cienega Creek riparian area is very likely to be impacted if the Rosemont Mine is approved. The mine operations will draw groundwater and potentially deplete this area of its water source.
The proposed Rosemont copper mine, if built, would be located in this undeveloped area about 30 miles southeast of Tucson. Eisel says New Articulation's Dance Theater hopes to provide audiences with a deeper understanding of this sensitive environment.
It's hard to say. A lot of the county studies and other studies show quite a bit of impact. There are about 10 species that are recognized by the U.S. government as critical species, threatened or endangered. So any loss of habitat, they're vulnerable species, so any loss of habitat will affect them. And then I think the big thing is also water. This area would be impacted, and then water is already a precious resource for us. So I think anything that would threaten our groundwater could be really detrimental just to our water supply and also for sustaining life in a habitat like this.
Isel says Rosemont Ours is a project of New Articulations Dance Theater, but it's also a collaborative project with several guest dancers and a filmmaker.
I started thinking about what happens if we put our own bodies into the habitat of some of these species.
The objective is to have the performers and eventually the audience make connections with the ecosystem of this area.
Inserting oneself into the landscape and embodying a plant or animal. And as dancers, we have a lot of facility with the body, and yet, becoming a species is a totally different ballgame. So we started taking trips to the mine and working with some naturalists to learn about the plant animal species that inhabit or migrate through that area, and also the Cienega Creek and Davidson Canyon areas. And we are calling the project Rosemont Ours. I just sort of thought of the word Rosemont Mine, and it's not mine. It sort of feels like something that we all own. We meaning plants and animals and human beings, and sort of how do we find a way to work together to steward a place.
Working as stewards of the natural environment is the initial impulse that led to this project. And it's also the motivation for these artists to delve into a politically controversial topic.
This project, this evolving project, has come from a desire to connect viewers to the species that reside and rely on this particular ecosystem.
Ben Johnson is a filmmaker collaborating on the Rosemont Ours project. He says his background is in nature photography and film production, and he's focused on the movements that take place in nature. This project, he says, seems like a logical progression for his work.
I feel like in some ways I've been interested up to this point in the way that the natural world dances, and this project is exploring the ways in which the human world dances within the natural world and vice versa, So it's felt incredibly natural to me to come to a location such as Cienega or the proposed Rosemont mine site itself, and be in this realm with dancers and have them engage with the natural world, embody it.
Johnson and Isel hope that by moving this performance off the stage and into the natural environment, they can provide a visual language that can communicate the hidden details of this ecosystem.
These dances, I don't even know if they're dances. These movement studies are small and intimate, and it's really about noticing the subtle movements of these creatures.
The Rosemont Ours project will be screened this fall. You can log on to our website at azpm.org for clips of the project, along with more information on New Articulations Dance Theater.
Beyond the idea of art for art's sake, some artists believe that their purpose is to provoke thought or discussion about a topic and to comment on the current state of affairs. Joining me now to discuss their experience with political art are Ceci Garcia, artist and founding member of the Raíces Taller 222 Art Gallery and Workshop, Rand Carlson, a political cartoonist and artist at the Random Arts Studio, and Michael Finlayson, the artistic director of the Beowulf Alley Theater Company. Thank you all for joining me today. I'd like to start our discussion about political art with asking you how you would define political art. Rand, why don't I start with you?
Well, it's easier for me because I'm a political cartoonist with the Weekly. I see political art as something that advocates something. When you look at it, it editorializes, it makes a statement. If you were a plein air artist or a landscape artist or a still life artist, that doesn't really say anything about anything. So there is where the discussion starts, I think. It advocates something through its perspective or its angle on the topic.
Well, I don't know if I would channel it so narrowly on that, because I do landscape, but usually there's barbed wire as comment to immigration issues. So I believe that it could be wide open. If a good piece of strong political art provokes you into thinking, then it's done its job.
To me, it's about relevance. It doesn't necessarily have to take a point. Sometimes when we do a play, we begin by making the conversation happen, and that's not necessarily something that advocates other than for what the conversation is, although a lot of great art is, about advocacy.
Relevance to whom, though?
Well, for example, we did a show called Word Clouds about the Safeway shooting, and we had survivors there, and what we tried to do was just the responses of the citizens of Tucson. We had gun owners, we had people who were at the shooting, we had in a story format. So we let people respond to that, to respond to their own experience of it. And they came away, in some cases, they came away very politically active, and certainly the survivors had, the Badgers particularly, who saw the show are now very much in the issue of guns and gun control right now.
Rand, you had a recent show that related to the topic of gun and gun violence. How did you come about that particular topic? Why guns?
Well, Americans are obsessed with guns. I mean, and if you look at the newspaper almost every day, I mean, even today's newspaper, there was 5 stories about gun violence. But I was driving to the studio one day, and this whole idea for the show about guns, Love Ray Guns, or United States of America, or One Nation Under Gun, just sort of downloaded into my head. And there it was. And so I really had to do it. I was compelled to do that show. And then lucky for me, a gallery owner approached me and said, let's do it.
My understanding is Raíces often does shows that are about topical current events. What are some of the kinds of things that Raíces has shown?
Well, I think a prime example is it's called the SB 1070 by the general public exhibition last summer. We rearranged our whole schedule to bring to this part of Arizona a look at what artists were thinking, what they might express concerning the immigration, the SB 1070. It was a look at racism. And we had participants from as far as New York City, Alaska.
Why do a show like that?
As a group of artists in a nonprofit, there's many different perspectives. And it's, we realize that we need to sometimes bring to the public those different perspectives that might not be published or may not be making the news, but definitely are a trigger in our awareness as artists. So why do we drop other exhibitions to bring you a political one that we know pieces will not sell? It's not about the money. It's about the value system of society.
I think artists in our community and communities across the country are the voice. We are the people who can speak for those who are underrepresented in other media outlets, and I'm not speaking of the Weekly. For example, if you look at an organization like Pan Left, I mean, they're a film organization that grabs cameras and goes out when something happens, and they're exemplary in terms of how art meets politics. And they're covering immigration issues and things like that spectacularly well. Or whether we're doing a theater show, a theater play, we did We Won't Pay by Dario Fo, who's an Italian communist. And right down the street was the Occupy Tucson. So we went over in the park and tried to hand out tickets to those guys and tried to make something happen. But artists, I think you might agree, are the voices for the underrepresented and have been time immemorial.
Rand, I wanted to ask you, so you do both fine art and you do the editorial or the cartooning. How does one inform the other, or do they? Are they separate in your mind?
Most of my tin collage work is whimsical, some people might say, or it plays off words. But the political art, like the work that I do for the Weekly, I do it to raise awareness. But I try to do it by, raising awareness by humor, I hope, or by irony or some other vehicle like that. You can turn people off with the message. You can preach, and that's really not a good way to get a point across. I try to lure them in, raise awareness of it, and then give them a little bit of a moment.
We're going to do a show called Modern Streetcar the Musical in May, and it's about what's going on downtown, and it's very street level. I hope the mayor comes. I hope he's not mad. But we have to have, that's a way of having that conversation. It's a very silly show. I mean, it's very silly, but it talks about what's been going on downtown and what's happening to businesses, the Ronstadt Center and all that other stuff.
Well, I want to thank the three of you for joining us to talk about political art today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Rain in the Rose Garden as the president responded to questions from reporters about controversies on several fronts.
We talked with the White House Communications Director, Jennifer Palmieri, about what the administration is doing to weather the political uproar.
And we get two takes on the president's management of the IRS revelations and more, and how all this might affect his broader second-term agenda.
Then, with Syria a high priority for Mr. Obama's meeting today with Turkey's Prime Minister, Margaret Warner has our update on the conflict and renewed efforts to put an end to the bloodshed.
Ray Suarez explores how demographic shifts and biblical ideas of helping others are changing the ways evangelical Christians view the immigration debate.
To me, this is a moral issue. And I do think that if you welcome the stranger and you treat the stranger as you would Jesus, it throws the whole thing into a different light and it messes up your politics.
And we close with the story of a scientific first, as researchers announced they cloned a human embryo to create stem cells.
And that's all ahead on tonight's NewsHour.
A Louisiana natural gas terminal was built to handle energy imports, and then came the fracking boom in the United States.
By 2009, people were pretty much convinced that we weren't going to import. And by the end of the year, we had become convinced that we actually had a shot at exporting.
America's next export, natural gas, on the next morning edition from NPR News.
According to artist Favianna Rodriguez, politics can be a dry and tedious topic. It's something that might alienate, but it's also something that impacts everyone. Rodriguez is featured in the new documentary, Migration is Beautiful, a film that demonstrates how art is used as a platform to engage in the political dialogue that surrounds immigration. Next, in an interview taped during her recent visit to Tucson, we hear how Rodriguez and a coalition of artists are engaging in one of the most important political discussions of our time.
I'm Favianna Rodriguez. I'm an artist, an activist, a printmaker, a teacher, and a public speaker.
Favianna Rodriguez is an artist based in Oakland, California. Her work as a graphic artist and printmaker has gotten her noticed, but she says her art is only one facet of who she really is.
I not only consider myself an artist, I'm also a cultural organizer, meaning that I look at how ways art and culture can be used to shift public opinion on issues of national concern.
Rodriguez was featured recently in a film titled Migration is Beautiful, which was produced by the multimedia arts and culture group I Am Other. The film focuses on her art and the role Rodriguez plays in the contentious immigration debate of our times, a role that Rodriguez says she couldn't help but fall into.
Living in California and really, caring about what happens in the country, especially around immigration, I care about that because my parents are migrants. And since I was young, migration has defined my family experience. Everything from Reagan's 1986 law to when Bill Clinton signed NAFTA to when the first anti-immigrant state-based law was introduced in California. I was 16 years old at the time. So I've always understood that the fight for migrant rights was often, they had a lot of racial undertones. The anti-immigrant movement had ways to really paint the face of migrants as being only a Latino face. So as an artist, I really was thinking, well, in a way they're telling a story. They're painting a very particular kind of picture of how they want us to see immigration, and they want us to see us, they would like for people to see it through the frame of criminality.
The narrative that tends to paint migrants as criminals, according to Rodriguez, is one that permeates the media. It's a pervasive story that gets told multiple times at the expense of a productive dialogue.
And in Arizona is where you see it, extremely harsh, and you see how these ideas of people thinking that migrants are criminals, or even of people's fears, really can translate into policy that hurts us all. And so if we're talking about these kinds of how things are framed and where people's ideas come from, people's ideas also come from culture. They come from art, they come from what the films they see, the books they read, the songs they listen to, the art they may see in a museum or on the street. And so I was interested in thinking about, well, what are other artists doing in Arizona, or what are artists doing in the entire Southwest to combat this? And also, how can we as artists create another kind of language to talk about migrants?
Rodriguez says she and other artists formed a collective known as Culture Strike to focus their attention on the developing anti-immigration policies of 2010. The group, in part, was formed as an attempt to try to understand how artists could participate in the national dialogue surrounding immigration.
One of the great things about Culture Strike is that we have formed a network. And by forming a network, we take the very first step, which is communicating with each other, supporting each other, trying to get visibility for the work that we do.
Rodriguez says she and other Culture Strike members hope to help Tucson artists, writers, and musicians find ways to engage in politics. This is something that she says is important regardless of where people live.
It's important to first note that as artists, we don't think we're from a particular state, or we don't even necessarily identify as being from a particular country. I think the thing that unifies us is that we're creative people, and we're looking at the art that's done here or around the world. And I think that we have something that binds us all, which is that we want to create beautiful things, and we want people to be inspired by that.
You can find more information on Culture Strike, the film Migration is Beautiful, and the work that is being done to create an inclusive dialogue about immigration by logging on to our website at azpm.org.
In our roundtable discussion, we heard about the choice that some artists must make between producing art that expresses their political views and producing art that sells. For working artist and gallery owner Stephen Derks, that choice was made necessary by the emotions he felt in the aftermath of recent events of gun violence. We'll find out what he decided to do next in this open studio visit.
My name is Stephen Derks, and I refer to myself as an artist, and I usually get a question, well, what does that mean? And I respond with that I primarily do steel sculpture and I do modern painting, and most people accept that. They're equally satisfying. Now, after I've been doing one for a while, I start to hunger to do the other thing. I heard that Carl Jung said once that the reason why artists make art is that they're fragmented and they want to become whole. And possibly the circle does that for me. Redemption is a big part of my own personal mythology. I view myself as someone who had fallen apart at a certain basic level and then rebuilt myself with the help of my community. It is expressed through the art that I do. And that expression is that I find an object that has been discarded, that's decayed and is no longer usable, and I reuse it, thus redeeming it. The more I do that, the more it reinforces my own personal redemption in life. It finds its way into all of my work. After Newtown happened, I think everyone in this country was wounded at a certain level. whether they wanted to admit it or not. And there was a fundamental shift. And for me, that fundamental shift happened in my studio while I was working. I was crafting hearts for Valentine's Day, and I couldn't resist not interpreting what had happened in those events. My resistance was that it's really hard to sell artwork that has guns in it and has a dark side to it, and that people don't gravitate to that. And, you know, let it be damned, I just decided I have to. This just sort of happened. Maybe it was, maybe it just needed one more event to push it over the top. Maybe the fact that I was just working with hearts and I was thinking in those terms, that it obliged me to look at what I was unwilling to look at. But ultimately, I'm grateful for that. When I started painting, for instance, I thought, can this sustain me? Can I just lay down color day after day and feel like I'm happy about that? And I still can. I mean, I painted some paintings a couple weeks ago, and it's exhilarating. I love seeing color and seeing what happens. But there's more to my artistic interest than that. And I don't have to choose between the two. I can do both. I think with each piece that I make, a little bit of reconciliation occurs. Hoping that I'm keeping the conversation going, particularly with the gun issue. Historically, what happens is that we get outraged and then we forget. My duty as an artist is to keep the conversation at the forefront, and that's what I intend to do with this work. You know, there's a lot of wounded people out there, and I would like people to recognize that it isn't a permanent state, that people can heal. I started out as an artist doing political pieces, and then I moved into just beauty, just color. Coming back to it makes me feel whole as an artist. Coming back to it makes it feel like I can use my art to leverage change.
Stephen Derks says that the public response to his art inspired by gun violence has actually been far more positive than he had anticipated. That's our show for tonight. To post a comment on any of these stories or to keep up with the latest news, visit our website, azpm.org. I'm Elizabeth Burden. Thank you for watching.